The gunshot echoed across the Montana Territory wilderness like a death knell, sending birds scattering from the treetops into the vast azure sky of 1876. Bethany Foster pressed her back against the rough bark of a ponderosa pine, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might burst from her chest. The stagecoach that had been carrying her westward lay overturned half a mile back, the driver dead, and her few possessions scattered to the winds. Only her wits and the wilderness now stood between her and the three men who had ambushed the coachmen, who had looked at her with eyes that promised far worse than death. "Miss, are you hurt?" The deep voice startled her so badly she nearly screamed, clapping a hand over her mouth just in time. A tall figure emerged from between the trees, leading a dappled gray horse. Dressed in worn leather chaps over denim pants, a dusty blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, he was unmistakably a cowboy. His revolver remained holstered, his free hand raised in a gesture of peace. "Stay back," Bethany warned, brandishing the small derringer she'd kept hidden in her skirts. Her hand trembled violently, but her finger hovered near the trigger. The cowboy stopped, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Owen Sutherland, madam. I heard gunfire and came to investigate." "Those men back there after you?" Tears welled in Bethany's eyes despite her determination to appear strong. "I'm afraid of men," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. The cowboy's expression softened, the sun catching his eyes a startling shade of green against his sun-bronzed face. "Fear ends beside me," he answered quietly. "I won't harm you. I give you my word." Something in his steady gaze made Bethany want to believe him. She lowered the derringer slightly but kept it ready. "Three men attacked the stagecoach, the driver. They killed him." Her voice broke. "I ran when they started searching through the luggage." Owen nodded grimly. "You did right to run. Those are likely the Harker brothers and their cousin. Been terrorizing coaches along this route for months." He glanced over his shoulder, listening. "They'll be tracking you. We need to move." "Why should I trust you?" Bethany demanded, though her options were few. "Because I'm offering help when you need it most, and because I swear on my mother's grave I mean you no harm." He extended his hand slowly. "Where were you headed, miss?" "Foster, Bethany Foster." She hesitated before answering. "Silver Creek. My uncle has a mercantile there." Owen nodded. "That's a 2-day ride from here. I've got a cabin about 4 miles north. We can shelter there tonight, then I'll escort you to Silver Creek tomorrow." A distant shout made them both freeze. The bandits had found the trail. "Miss Foster, I don't mean to rush you, but we're out of time for deliberation." Owen's voice remained calm, but urgency tinged his words. Bethany made her decision, tucking the derringer back into her pocket. "If you betray my trust, Mr. Sutherland, I will shoot you myself." A smile flickered across his face. "I would expect nothing less." He helped her mount his horse, then took the reins and led them swiftly through the trees, moving in a direction perpendicular to her original flight path. For nearly an hour they traveled in tense silence, Owen guiding the horse over rocky terrain where they would leave minimal tracks. Bethany studied him surreptitiously. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn shirt, his movements confident but cautious. Despite her fear, she found herself drawn to the quiet strength he emanated. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they reached a small clearing. A rustic cabin stood nestled against a backdrop of pines, a corral with 2 horses to one side and a small creek gurgling nearby. "It's not much," Owen said, helping her dismount, "but it's solid and safe." Bethany swayed slightly when her feet touched the ground, exhaustion and the day's trauma catching up with her. Owen steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow, releasing her the moment she regained her balance. "Thank you," she said stiffly, unused to accepting help from strangers, particularly male ones. The cabin's interior was spare but clean, a far cry from the chaos Bethany had fled 3 months ago in Boston. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Simple wooden furniture, a shelf of books, and various tools suggested a solitary but not uncomfortable existence. I'll tend to the horses, Owen said. Bar the door behind me. There's water in the bucket if you want to wash up. Once alone, Bethany explored the single-room cabin. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. A worn Bible sat on the table beside a journal and pencil. On the wall hung a daguerreotype of a smiling woman with Owen's eyes, alongside a tarnished cavalry sword. The water in the bucket was cold but clean. She washed her face and hands, trying to gather her composure. 23 years old and alone in the wilderness with a stranger, this was hardly the fresh start she had envisioned when fleeing Boston. When Owen returned, he carried her carpetbag. Found this by the coach, he explained, setting it down. Couldn't salvage much else. Tears of gratitude pricked her eyes. The bag contained all she had left from her former life. Thank you, truly. Owen busied himself building a fire, giving her space to collect herself. Are you hungry? I've got some stew I can heat up. Yes, please. Bethany smoothed her travel-worn skirts. Mr. Sutherland, I should explain why I reacted as I did, why I said what I said. Owen shook his head. No need to explain fear, Miss Foster. Out here, fear keeps folks alive. It's more than that. She took a deep breath. In Boston, I was engaged to a man named Richard Blackwell. He was respected, wealthy, and utterly cruel behind closed doors. When I broke the engagement, he threatened me, said I'd never be free of him. Her fingers traced the faded bruise on her wrist. I fled west to start anew. Owen's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. Some men don't deserve the name. I thought I'd left the danger behind, Bethany continued. Then the stagecoach attack happened, and I saw those same cruel intentions in the bandits' eyes. The Harkers won't find you here, Owen promised, stirring the pot of stew hanging over the fire. And tomorrow we'll get you safely to your uncle in Silver Creek. They ate in companionable silence, the stew simple but hearty. As darkness fell, Owen insisted Bethany take the bed while he made a pallet by the door. I'll keep watch, he said. Try to rest. Sleep came unexpectedly easily to Bethany that night. The combination of exhaustion and the strange sense of security Owen's presence provided lulling her into dreamless slumber. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee. Owen stood at the stove, his back to her as he prepared a simple breakfast. Good morning, he said without turning. Hope you slept well. Bethany smoothed her hair, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. Better than I expected to, thank you. Over breakfast, Owen unfolded a worn map. Silver Creek is here, he said, pointing. We'll follow the ridge line to avoid the main trail. It'll take longer, but it's safer. You seem to know this area well, Bethany observed. Been ranging these parts for 5 years now. Work as a guide sometimes, hunt, trap in winter. He folded the map carefully. Came west after the war, needed space to think. You fought in the war between the states. Owen nodded, his expression closing slightly. Union cavalry, not something I care to dwell on. Bethany respected his reticence. Her own past-held memories she preferred not to revisit. They set out mid-morning, Bethany riding Owen's dappled gray while he rode a chestnut gelding. The day was clear, the Montana wilderness stretching endlessly around them in breathtaking beauty. Despite the circumstances, Bethany found herself marveling at the majesty of the mountains, so different from Boston's crowded streets. Owen proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and teaching her to identify animal tracks. His quiet confidence put her at ease, and she found herself sharing stories of her life in Boston, her work as a schoolteacher, her love of literature, her dreams of someday writing stories of her own. What made you decide to come all this way? Owen asked as they paused to rest the horses by a small stream. Bethany watched a hawk circling overhead. After I ended the engagement, Richard made it impossible for me to stay. He spread rumors that I was unstable, unsuitable to teach children. Her lips pressed into a thin line. No school would hire me. Then my parents died of influenza last winter, and I had nothing left to keep me there. I'm sorry for your loss, Owen said quietly. My uncle, my mother's brother, wrote offering me a place with his family. I hadn't seen him since I was a child, but the chance to start fresh was too tempting to refuse. She turned to face Owen. What about you? Do you have family? A shadow crossed his face. Had a brother, lost him at Gettysburg. Parents passed before the war. He smiled faintly. Just me and the mountains now. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes. His gaze met hers briefly. But solitude has its merits. They rode on, the conversation flowing more easily as the day progressed. By late afternoon, Bethany realized with surprise that she felt comfortable in Owen's presence, a sensation she hadn't experienced around a man since before Richard had shown his true nature. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow. Owen built a small fire and prepared a meal of jerky and biscuits. The night air grew cold as darkness fell, and Bethany huddled closer to the fire, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Here, Owen said, draping his coat over her. Can't have you freezing before we reach Silver Creek. The gesture touched her. Won't you be cold? I'm used to it. He settled on the other side of the fire, checking his rifle before laying it within reach. We should reach your uncle's place by midday tomorrow. Bethany nodded, surprised by the twinge of regret she felt. Once they reached Silver Creek, she would have no reason to see Owen again. The thought troubled her more than it should after such brief acquaintance. Owen, she said softly, using his given name for the first time, thank you, not just for rescuing me, but for showing me that not all men are to be feared. He looked up, the firelight casting his features in warm gold and deep shadow. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Bethany. You survived what that man did to you. You had the courage to leave everything behind and start anew. That takes remarkable strength. His words warmed her more than the fire. No one had spoken to her with such respect in a very long time. The silence between them grew charged with unspoken possibilities. Bethany looked away first, suddenly nervous under his gaze. We should get some rest, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The night passed peacefully, but Bethany's dreams were troubled visions of Richard finding her, of the bandits catching them, of losing this newfound sense of safety. She awoke with a gasp just before dawn to find Owen already up, watching the eastern sky lighten. Bad dreams? He asked quietly. She nodded, pulling herself upright. The past has a way of following us, doesn't it? Yes, Owen agreed, but so does hope. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey. As they rode, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. Storms coming, Owen observed. We should pick up the pace. They had just crested a hill when Owen suddenly reined in his horse, raising a hand for Bethany to stop. His posture had gone rigid, alert. What is it? She whispered. Riders, coming up from the south. He pointed to a dust cloud in the distance. Could be nothing, but I don't like taking chances. He studied the terrain ahead. There's a hunter's cabin about a mile east. We'll wait there until they pass. The abandoned cabin was little more than a shack, but it offered shelter from both the approaching storm and prying eyes. They had just secured the horses in a small lean-to when the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Inside, Owen moved to the single grimy window, watching through the streaked glass as the downpour intensified. Thunder rumbled overhead, making Bethany jump. Never did like storms, she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. They're necessary, Owen said, cleansing in their way. He turned from the window. The riders have passed, looked like ordinary travelers, but better safe than sorry. The close confines of the cabin made Bethany acutely aware of Owen's presence. In the dim light, she studied his profile, the strong jaw dusted with stubble, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken once. May I ask you something personal? She ventured. Owen nodded, settling on an overturned crate. Why do you live alone, a man like you? I would think you'd have settled down by now. A rueful smile touched his lips. Came close once. There was a woman in Helena, Margaret, daughter of a banker, we courted for nearly a year. He looked down at his calloused hands. Her father didn't approve of a former soldier with no prospects beyond a small homestead. Eventually, she chose security over love. I'm sorry, Bethany said softly. Owen shrugged. It was for the best. I wouldn't have fit in her world and she would have wilted in mine. His eyes met hers. What about you? Will you ever trust enough to love again? The question caught her off guard. I don't know, she answered honestly. Richard took something from me, not just my trust in men, but my trust in my own judgment. I thought he was kind and honorable. I was so terribly wrong. One man's cruelty doesn't define all men, Owen said gently. I'm beginning to see that, Bethany replied, holding his gaze a moment longer than necessary. The storm passed, leaving behind freshly washed air and clear skies. They continued toward Silver Creek, the landscape growing more familiar to Owen as they neared town. Your uncle's mercantile is on the main street, Owen said as they rode. Frank Foster, right? Good man, fair in his dealings. You know him? Bethany asked, surprised. Know of him. Silver Creek's small, everyone knows everyone else's business. He glanced at her. He'll look after you. The town's growing, but it's a decent place. You'll be safe there. Bethany nodded, uncertain why his reassurances left her feeling hollow rather than relieved. They reached the outskirts of Silver Creek just after noon. The town was larger than Bethany had expected, a proper main street lined with businesses, side streets with neat houses, even a small church with a white steeple. Owen led them toward a two-story building with Foster's General Mercantile painted across its front. A bell jingled as they entered, and a balding man with kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. Can I help you folks? He asked, then his eyes widened in recognition. Bethany, is that you? Uncle Frank, she confirmed with a smile. The reunion was warm, with Frank pulling her into a bear hug and immediately calling for his wife to come downstairs. Amidst the flurry of introductions and explanations, Bethany was acutely aware of Owen standing quietly by the door, hat in hand. When she explained about the stagecoach attack and Owen's rescue, Frank pumped his hand gratefully. We're in your debt, Mr. Sutherland. Please, you must stay for supper at least. Owen shook his head. Kind of you, but I should be getting back, got livestock to tend to. Bethany felt a surge of dismay. But the day's half gone. Surely you can't make it back to your cabin before nightfall. I'll camp along the way, Owen replied. Done it plenty of times. Frank insisted on paying him for his trouble and for escorting Bethany safely to town. Owen reluctantly accepted a small sum, though Bethany could tell he was uncomfortable with the transaction. At least let me see you off, she said, following him outside to where the horses were hitched. Away from her relative's curious eyes, she found herself struggling for words. I don't know how to thank you properly. Owen adjusted his saddle, not meeting her gaze. No thanks needed, anyone would have done the same. No, Bethany said firmly, not anyone. What you did, how you treated me with such respect, such kindness, it was extraordinary. She hesitated, then added softly, I'll never forget it. He looked at her then, something unreadable in his expression. You have a chance for a fresh start here, Bethany. I hope you find happiness. Will I see you again? The question escaped before she could stop it. I come to town for supplies every few weeks, he said, mounting his horse. Take care of yourself, Miss Foster. She watched him ride away, a curious ache in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Bethany settled into life in Silver Creek. Her aunt and uncle welcomed her warmly into their home, introducing her to the townspeople and helping her secure a position as the town's new schoolteacher, as the previous one had recently married and moved to Oregon. Bethany threw herself into her work, finding joy in teaching the children of Silver Creek. Her uncle's mercantile became a second home, and she often helped there after school hours. The townsfolk were friendly, and several young men made their interest known, but Bethany kept them at a polite distance. 4 weeks after her arrival, she was arranging stock in the mercantile when the bell above the door jingled. Looking up, her heart leapt at the sight of Owen Sutherland stepping through the doorway. He looked different in town, cleaner, his hair trimmed, wearing a new shirt beneath his worn leather vest. Their eyes met across the store and a small smile touched his lips. "Miss Foster," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Good to see you looking well." "Mr. Sutherland," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. "What brings you to town?" "Supplies," he answered, holding up a list, "and some business with the land office." He hesitated, then added, "How are you finding Silver Creek?" "It suits me," she said honestly. "I've started teaching at the school," pride flashed in his eyes. "They're fortunate to have you." Their conversation was interrupted by other customers, but before he left, Owen paused by the counter where she worked. "I hear there's a social at the church this Saturday evening. Will you be attending?" Bethany's pulse quickened. "I had planned to, yes." "Perhaps I'll see you there then," he said, placing his hat back on his head before stepping out into the sunshine. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Bethany spent more time than usual preparing for the social, selecting her best dress, a modest blue gown that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranging her honey brown hair with special care. The church hall was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, a small band playing in one corner while tables laden with food lined the walls. Bethany entered with her aunt and uncle, immediately scanning the crowd for Owen. He stood by the punch bowl, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his Sunday best. When he spotted her, he straightened, a smile breaking across his face that made her heart flutter. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she approached. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up nicely yourself." They danced twice that evening, proper, respectable dances with appropriate distance between them, yet Bethany felt every point of contact like a brand. His hand at her waist, guiding her through the steps, his eyes never leaving hers. As the evening drew to a close, Owen asked if he might call on her properly the next day. Bethany accepted with barely contained delight. True to his word, Owen appeared at her uncle's house after church the following day, hat in hand and a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched somewhat awkwardly in the other. "I thought perhaps we might walk by the creek," he suggested, "if that would be agreeable to you and your uncle." Frank Foster gave his blessing, though Bethany caught the knowing look that passed between him and her aunt. News of Owen's attentions would be all over town by supper time. She was certain. They walked along the creek that gave the town its name, the conversation flowing easily between them. Owen spoke of his plans to expand his small ranch, adding cattle to the horses he already raised. Bethany shared her hopes of someday opening a proper school building rather than teaching in the converted storefront currently serving that purpose. "You've settled in well here," Owen observed as they sat on a fallen log overlooking the water. "Yes," Bethany agreed, "though I still have moments when I look over my shoulder half expecting to see Richard there." Owen's expression darkened. "Has there been word from him?" She shook her head. "No, and I pray there never will be, but the fear lingers." "Fear ends beside me," Owen repeated his words from the day they met. "I meant that, Bethany." She looked up at him, warmed by the intensity in his gaze. "I know you did, and it was true. When I'm with you, I don't feel afraid." He took her hand then, his touch gentle. "I've thought of you every day since I left you here. I told myself it was foolish, that you needed time, that you might never want another man in your life after what you endured. But I can't help how I feel." Bethany's heart thundered in her chest. "How do you feel, Owen?" "Like I've found something I didn't know I was searching for." His voice was rough with emotion. "I care for you, Bethany, more than I thought possible after such a short acquaintance." She turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. "I feel it too," she admitted softly. "It frightens me how quickly you've come to matter to me." "I would never hurt you," he promised. "I would sooner cut off my own hand." "I believe you," she whispered, and realized it was true. The man before her had shown nothing but respect and kindness from the moment they met. "Will you kiss me, Owen?" His eyes widened in surprise, then darkened with desire. Slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Bethany responded. When they broke apart, both were breathing rapidly. I should take you back, Owen said reluctantly. Before your uncle comes looking for you with his shotgun, Bethany laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. He likes you, but yes, we should return. Over the following months, Owen became a frequent visitor to Silver Creek. He courted Bethany properly, always respectful of her boundaries, patient when memories of Richard's cruelty surfaced and made her withdraw. Their courtship blossomed through the summer and into autumn. Owen brought her to his cabin, showing her the improvements he'd made: a larger corral for his growing herd, a garden plot, new furniture he'd built with his own hands. "I'm building something here," he told her as they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "Something lasting, something worth sharing." Bethany understood what he wasn't saying. "Are you asking me something, Owen Sutherland?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I'm asking if you could see yourself here with me, as my wife." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and clean as mountain spring water. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hands. "Yes, I could see that very clearly." They married in Silver Creek's church just before the first snow, with the entire town in attendance. Frank Foster gave the bride away, beaming with pride. The schoolchildren presented their teacher with a quilt they had made under the guidance of the town's women, a wedding gift that brought tears to Bethany's eyes. Owen had expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a small study where Bethany could write during the winter months when travel to town was difficult. They settled into married life with surprising ease, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a partnership founded on mutual respect and deepening love. Spring brought news that shook Silver Creek to its core. Richard Blackwell had been arrested in Boston for the murder of his new fiancée. The newspapers carried lurid details of his violence and cruelty, confirming everything Bethany had fled from. "He can't hurt you now," Owen said, holding her as she trembled with the news. "You're safe. You've always been safe with me." "I know," she whispered against his chest. "Fear ends beside you." That summer, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows around their home, Bethany shared news of her own: they were expecting a child. Owen's joy was boundless, his tenderness toward her increasing with each passing day as her body changed to accommodate their growing baby. Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn day, with golden leaves swirling outside the window and a midwife from town attending. They named her Hope, for what had brought them together and sustained them through all challenges. As Owen held his newborn daughter, gazing down at her with wonder, Bethany watched the man who had saved her in more ways than one. The cowboy who had promised that fear would end beside him had kept his word. In his arms, in the home they had built together, she had found not just safety but a love deeper and truer than she had ever dared to dream possible. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, looking up to find her watching him. Bethany smiled, her heart full to bursting. "I'm thinking that when you found me that day in the woods, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a new one filled with joy instead of fear, with love instead of pain." Owen leaned down to kiss her, their daughter cradled between them. "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "And we'll keep doing so, every day for the rest of our lives." In the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Bethany often thought back to that moment in the Montana wilderness when a frightened young woman had whispered her deepest fear to a stranger. The cowboy's answer had been a promise he had kept faithfully beside him. Fear had indeed ended, replaced by a love that grew stronger with each passing day.